Morning. Welcome to the Cory Morgan Show. Last live one we're going to be doing for a while. This is the day after Canada Day, day before weekend, weird sort of in between sort of thing. I think most people aren't working. They're out camping or just taking the day off or doing what they can. It's a little hot to be safely doing too many things out there. The fires are looking pretty scary in BC. We're into just another bizarre year. You know, that's all we need is a terrible forest fire year to add to everything else we've been suffering under this last 16 months. But let's just hope for the best and push on. I hope everybody had a good time yesterday. I know there were a lot of people saying you should all hang your heads in shame and misery and express apologies and feeling bad about yourself for what people did 100 years ago because they feel you're responsible for it today. And of course, they're full of shit. But most people ignored that, went out, had a good time yesterday. Unfortunately, the hot weather brought out some of the extreme too, and we saw that with people protesting against Chandra, when we saw that with the more church vandalism and people talk about how terrible Canada is as a country, yet they're enjoying all those freedoms that allowed them to go out and march and talk about how terrible Canada is as a country. It's quite an irony with that. By the way, I've got Tim Moen on as a guest today. He's the leader of the Canadian Libertarian Party, the federal one. He's been in for 7 years there. He's decided to hang up his hat from that role. That's been a long stretch, and that's a tough role to take on, and an important one. That pushing for that liberty movement, it's thankless. It's certainly not a big money role. You're dealing with a lot of very difficult people to manage, and his patience has been outstanding, and his messaging has always been consistent and good. So I'm looking forward to talking to him. It's going to be hard for that party to find somebody who can reasonably fill that role that he did for so many years so well. I'll begin though with our sponsors too. Speaking of liberty, we are not a tax-funded publication. The Western Standard gets no money from the government or any government on any level. We don't ask for any of that money, and they are not offering you that money. We rely on sponsors and you guys for viewing, watching our advertisers, and subscribing to the Western Standard as well. So Resistance Coffee has been sponsoring us for some time now. These guys are great. I love politics, messaging, and of course capitalism with a sense of humor. These guys are a Western Canadian company, and they are serving people who are tired of the woke political correctness being rammed down your throat everywhere you turn. I mean, you go out, you buy some bath towels, and you find out that part of your purchase money actually went towards, some environmental kooks who want to shut you out of business with your own means of living. What hypocrisy? They want to take your money, but they want to fund those groups that want to shut you down. Well, Resistance Coffee Company isn't doing any of that. They are unapologetically funding other groups. 10% of every purchase is going to organizations that are fighting for your constitutional freedoms, though, like the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms and a number of others. If you go to resistancecoffee.com, you can look and you'll see where those 10%, that those funding is going towards from your coffee purchases. And you'll see those brands of coffee. They got Defund the CBC and Liberal Tears and a lot of, they got a great sense of humor while they're at it. And their coffee is really good. I've ordered it. I've had it. I've got it at home. It's good coffee. And if you type in the promo code Western Standard on your first order, you'll get 10% off of that too. So it's just, you're winning all around. Go to resistancecoffee.com. Check that stuff out. Get some. Support good causes, have good coffee. You can't do any better than that. Our other sponsor, speaking of standing up for your rights, is the CCFR, and that's the Canadian Coalition for Firearms Rights. They've been sponsoring us for some time, and nobody works as hard as them to fight for your rights to own and use firearms. And you can see the Liberals are coming after them. They will not rest until they take your property away. They've been doing it for 30 years. They're not going to stop. We've got to fight back. We've got to push back. The CCFR is pushing back on your behalf. Go to firearmsrights.ca and click why join us. And they'll tell you why it's worthwhile helping them help you, because this is an important fight. And if we don't stand up for our rights, we don't push back, they'll win and they will take your property away. They'll take your right away, your ability to go out and enjoy a firearm, whether you want to shoot beer cans with it in a safe area or go hunting or collect them. That's your business. Doesn't matter. You shouldn't have to explain yourself. Speaking of not having to explain yourself, I get tired of people saying, why do you whine so much about the masks? Oh, they aren't such a big deal. You know what? I don't have to justify why I don't want to wear a mask. I don't. You liberty-robbing kooks who want to have laws force me to wear a mask have to justify it. You're the ones. The burden of proof isn't on me. I get sick of that. People saying, you've got to justify why you don't want to wear a mask. No, I don't. I do not at all. And the medical evidence is not there. it's questionable on how effective they've been anywhere in reducing spread of COVID. There's a number of things that we seem to be finding that reduce spread of COVID. There's seasonal trends. There's no doubt about that. And of course, people will argue or debate on other vaccinations. But the bottom line is Alberta's COVID cases are down to next to nothing. People aren't dying. I mean, it's barely any. And again, there are people who are in their 80s. There are people who are already sick. Your chances of dying of COVID now in Alberta on a day-to-day basis are well under 1 in 2 million. That's where it's sitting at. So no, I don't want to wear your friggin' mask. Forget it. And almost all of Alberta has gotten rid of their mask legislation. Almost all. Except for Calgary. Yeah, Naheed Nenshi and, 6 of his little buddies there on council had managed to get the mask bylaw extended. They're going to meet on Monday to reevaluate and see whether or not they want to keep it longer. So while everybody else in Alberta has already been unmasked since Canada Day, Calgary is stuck in those laws. And I don't know. I've written on it. You can go to the westernstandardonline.com. I've written a couple of columns on that. I mean, the bottom line is it's Nenshi trying to score political points. That's all it is. There's no two ways about it. And it puts people in an awkward spot. I know some people are saying just ignore it. And I think for the most part, do it. But the problem is they put the enforcement on the business owners, and that puts them on the spot. And I went through that when I'd fight with people when I used to own the pub, for example, in Pritis. You get somebody coming in and they're overserved and they're saying, I don't care. It's only me. You serve me. Well, sorry, but unfortunately, due to the laws, I'm now your babysitter. And if I overserve you, you aren't responsible for what you do afterwards, but I'll be. And they could pull my license. They can shut my pub down. They could sue me. There's a number of things that could happen. And it's wrong, but it's the way it is right now. And so the business owner gets punished for the irresponsibility of others. And this mask bylaw, unfortunately, kind of does the same thing. So if you go into a store, a small one, and AHS comes in and they haven't tried to make you mask up or haven't kicked you out, for not wearing a mask, it's the store owner can end up getting fined. And it's ridiculous. And again, it puts their staff on the spot. So I say ignore some of the mask bylaws. By all means, go around, but don't be like one of those lunatics, again, Kevin Johnson and his buddies who are going into stores and harassing innocent workers and business owners and being belligerent about it. If they say, we need you to wear the mask or leave, just leave. But put the pressure on the politicians reasonably. Push back. Again, not like the lunatics who were out there hounding and harassing Tyler Shandro's wife and children yesterday. That was just pathetic. It really was. You guys, I understand why you're upset. I get upset every day. That's what I do on this show. That's what I do when I write columns. But I don't go hounding and harassing the families of politicians. I don't get on their case. They had nothing to do with it. I understand you're mad. I understand you don't like what he did. But that's just not the way we do things, and we don't have to go down that road. Now, on with I'm going to get some ranting about the mainstream media, one of my favorite areas to go into anyway. So I was looking at the news. I punish myself when I'm at home. I like getting the weather report and some of the other stuff. So I tune in to see CTV News. And they're out. You want to know one of the best ways that Shandro doesn't deserve everything he gets. See, this is what I'm talking about. Going after wives and kids of politicians is unreasonable. That does not deserve everything he gets. It's a fucking mask law. You don't get on the case of somebody's family over that. And I know they've pressured businesses. They've done a lot of things that are more serious than the mask law. But no, hounding and harassing people's families is off limits. And I'm going to call it out every friggin' time. We got bad enough people in political office as it is. What do you expect to come in when they got to deal with that? No, there's no justifying it. And they don't deserve everything they got there. Now I'm going to get back to where I was with CTV. One of the things media loves doing when they want to push a messaging is called mainstreaming. And, you've seen it all the time. They go out there and they go out there, they interview a number of people, and then they'll pick out the ones that they want to give the messaging that they did. So they went out with to a few people with the unmasking and asked, do you support the Alberta dropping dropping the regulation? Sorry, just some of these comments are getting me going. Do you support ending the restrictions in Alberta? And every single person they somehow found said, no, I think he's moving too fast. I'm kind of scared. I think we should stay locked down. They even found one bar owner said, yeah, we're going to keep our mask bylaws even when we don't have to anymore. We're going to, well, not bylaws, but, regulations. People are still going to have to mask up in our business establishment. That's their right as a business owner. But what a load of crap. I mean, come on. If you're going to go around and talk to people on the street and such, don't try to tell me that every business owner really actually wants to keep those mask laws, that they want to gag up their customers going inside when there's no reason for it. It's uncomfortable. You can't smile at each other. You can't express at each other. It's just not a pleasant experience. People literally do and are leaving the city to get services and enjoy themselves without masks, without regulations, things such as that. But CTV put on their little dog and pony show there. They managed to go out and find, and that was something that was funny with some of their mainstreaming, because the people they were talking to, who they'd found, who were saying they were pretty scared and uncomfortable with the getting rid of these mask laws and getting rid of the restrictions on people, were all sitting on patios unmasked. So, okay, where are you coming from? But I mean, I wonder how many people they had to go through before they found a solid slate with not a single person who could just sit there and say, you know what? I'm kind of thrilled. I'm looking forward to having some personal liberties going into this summer. I'm looking forward to going into a business and being able to smile at somebody and see them smile back. Somehow CTV could not find a single person who was happy to see the restrictions going away. That's astounding. Wow. Good work, guys. And to actually find a business to say they like keeping people masked up within their establishment and that they're going to do it even after the law says they don't have to anymore. That was good work. That's solid journalism, guys. Amazing. Again, if you're going to do some mainstreaming, try and give a little balance, show a little of both. I mean, it was just so blatant and nauseating. I had to change the channel. But, we're into interesting times. Hopefully, we do see more broadening of media platforms, more discourse, things out there, more competition, and we'll get some better points of view. So I'm going to bring somebody in with a better point of view. Tim Moen, I see, is waiting in the lobby there. I've ranted at you guys enough to start the morning off. Let's see how this goes. Hey, Tim, how you doing?
Hey, fantastic. I was enjoying the rant. I didn't want it to stop.
Oh, I'll be ranting a lot for a long time yet.
Lots to rant about.
There certainly is, and this of all years has been, I guess, I would say, one of the most challenging and dejecting, as far as liberty lovers go, that we've seen in living memory. I mean, not just the eagerness with the state to crack down on our liberties. We weren't really surprised by that, but the willingness of the populace to just go along with it. So, I mean, your role has been more as important as ever and difficult as ever. I appreciate what you've done, but we've heard word you've after 7 years, you're going to be stepping aside as the leader of the Libertarian Party of Canada.
Yeah, it's time to hand the torch off to someone with a bit more energy and maybe a little bit more optimism and less cynicism. Being in this role for 7 years kind of beats a guy down over time, and the party deserves someone who has some fresh energy. So, it's time for me to take a break, and I'll still be involved with the party and supporting it, and maybe I'll take on a board role or something that's a little less requires a little less commitment and energy, let's say. So yeah, it has been a challenging year. You're right. And a lot of us liberty activists, let's say, waver between optimism and pessimism over the years as we fight this battle. And, this last year it's been really hard to maintain optimism. You rightly point out that it's not just the predictable government impositions, but it's now kind of like slave on slave control, right? And I'm already hearing from people that all these restrictions that remain are the fault of people that aren't vaccinated, because they're the ones that are causing this, right? And the example I used on another interview I had was, imagine you're on a slave plantation and a couple of the slaves aren't following the master's rules to a T, and maybe they're staying up later than they should and not putting out enough work or something like that. And so the master punishes all the slaves because these two yahoos aren't being good slaves. And what we're seeing is equivalent to the slaves turning on each other rather than the master who's literally owning them and forcing them to work. So this is, you know, the blame ought to be directed at government and officials and not at our fellows. But here we are, and you know, it's hard to maintain any optimism in this state. So, you know, part of me thinks, well, batten down the hatches. It's, you know, just survive the coming, you know, statism on steroids, the Great Reset, whatever you want to call it. I mean, this is not over, right? The government has learned from us that we are compliant and we will obey each other and turn on each other. And, you know, they've softened us up considerably over the past year. And now here we are. And, you know, this is just the start. You know, we're going to get some of our liberties back. You know, I'm raw dog in the air with my face right now. You know, and in my community that, you know, masks are off now. That's great. But let's not fool ourselves. The next thing on the agenda is going to be climate. If you don't have a correct narrative when it comes to the climate, you're going to be ostracized from society in the same way people that refuse to mask and aren't getting vaccinated are going to be, you know, they're the untouchable class, right? We have kind of this apartheid of people who are compliant and will believe and parrot everything the government and the establishment media tells them to parrot. And then there's those who are not compliant and not parroting everything. And the people that aren't compliant, we're seeing exactly what is going to happen to them. They are not going to be allowed to participate in society like the rest of us. So you know, I suspect that trend will continue. It'll just be under a different guise, maybe not a pandemic. Maybe it'll be, you know, the untouchables are those who put the fate of planet Earth in danger by denying climate catastrophe narrative, or, you know, who knows what it'll be. But yeah, I won't lie to you. I think some of what I've seen over the past year from my fellow Canadians has kind of just drained the energy from me and made me realize, you know, maybe I'm fighting for the wrong people here. Maybe I should just focus on my family or something for a while.
Yeah, it just gets exhausting. But I mean, as you've stated, I expect it's in you. You'll take a breather, but you're not going anywhere in the long run.
No, I got a lot of opinions in me, Cory, and they got to come out. And, you know,
yeah.
It's so, yeah, I'm not going anywhere. But yeah, I got to take a bit of a breather.
Well, and that precedent, as you said, like one of the things I found really chilling a little while back is it came out of, I believe, Joe Biden. And he was talking, you know, of course, we see these sporadic issues concerning racism and things like that. But he called racism a public health emergency. And that terminology right off the bat, whoa. Now, here you have taken directly from this recent excuse to crack down on every civil liberty known, and you're applying it to something completely unrelated. And I just see that as you're using it as justification. Of course, we're going to see that, as you said, with climate change and pretty much anywhere else where the government wants to bypass the constitutional or charter checks and balances we have in our individual rights. As long as they can somehow call it a public health emergency, we're all up shit creek.
Well, yeah. And look, I don't know if you got this message. I suspect you did as well as I did. When I opened up Facebook yesterday, I got this message saying that you people, you know, may have been exposed to extremist views, and you can get support for that. Some people are getting messages saying that they themselves were exposed to extremist views and they can get support for that. What are the extremist views? Well, of course, they are views that are pro-freedom, pro-liberty, you know, just that our society ought not revolve around imposition of violence from the state, and that's considered extremism now. And so it seems just a little suspicious, let's say, that at the same time they're using all this language about how racism, having particular thoughts in your head creates a public health emergency. Well, it's not hard to connect the dots here and say, well, if you don't have correct think on climate, that's a public health emergency. That's you're in danger. You're like a virus in the population, spreading these dangerous ideas that can lead to dangerous outcomes and catastrophe. So, and Facebook is right in there with these warnings that we've been exposed to these toxins or viruses or, you know, extremist ideas. It's really troubling.
Well, yeah, and I mean extremism. That's a pretty subjective sort of point of view on what may or may not be extreme. I mean, Southern
Right.
supporters of emancipation in the 1850s would have been considered extremists by their contemporaries at that time. Thankfully,
Well,
a lot,
yeah.
a lot of them
Well,
didn't back down.
Well, yeah, and look, here we have essentially the only distinguishing factor between a government and a criminal cartel is that most people believe what the government's doing is moral, right? But by any objective measure, the institution, the cartel has done, industrial scale kidnapping, forcible confinement, theft through taxation. They call it taxation, but it's theft. Murder. All these things are done by this organization, and yet most of the people I see want this same organization that commits murder, rape, assault, fraud, theft, kidnapping. They want that organization to be in charge of healthcare and education and thought control, really now, by the looks of things. So you tell me, what is that not extremism? Is that not an extremist view? Maybe it's the popular opinion and the zeitgeist now that everyone believes. And, but I think that's extremism. And I'm simply challenging that narrative and saying, hey, look, you don't have the right to do these things to me, even if you win a popularity contest and call yourself the government and call your theft taxation. You still don't have the right to do all these things to me. I don't think that's extremist. I think that's just common sense, and that's normal. That's ought to be the norm. But I'm the one considered extreme here. I don't think so.
Yeah, well, and as you said, you kind of touched a little on the irony of some of the people that are. I mean, it should have been a moment of revelation now that everybody's kind of realizing the horrors of the residential school system, and they've seen it's in their face. It was always there. We just haven't talked about it. It was that the little thing, that we didn't want to face. I mean, the bottom line was the government took people forcibly from their families and put them into schools to reprogram them. Now, people are rightly horrified in facing this, but a lot of the same people, as you said, who are really losing it over this are the same people who want more government, more intrusion on our lives, when you should be coming to the conclusion this is why we have to take the power away from the government, empower the individual so that this sort of thing can never happen again. They're taking away the wrong lesson from this horror.
Right. Yeah. So here were, people who had an extremist views, right? What I would call statism, which they acted on in earnest belief. They believe that for the greater good, they can kidnap these kids, rip them away from their families, tear families apart, put them in these abusive institutions, where they suffered horrible abuse and death quite often. And, but the same institution ought to be in charge of our education today. And look, we still have some remnants of this, right? I mean, look, if you take your kid out of school and don't report to the government what curriculum your kid is learning, if you refuse to pay the taxes that support government schools, the guns will come out. Right. I had someone on Twitter say, well, no one ever forced me to school at gunpoint. Okay, here's an experiment for you. If you want to see the guns, here's what you do. Stop paying the taxes that support public schools. Okay, stop sending your kids to school and refuse to report to the government what kind of learning activities your kids are doing. And then when the enforcers come and demand to see proof, refuse. And when they escalate force, just respond in kind. The guns will come out, believe me. Yeah, I don't recommend this experiment, by the way, but everything the government does is backed up by violence and guns. And, that's why it ought to be limited, because we don't want a society that's organized around violence and coercion. But these people, without any hint of irony, they will gladly support public schools. And by the way, public schools outstrip even the Catholic Church in terms of sexual abuse, physical abuse of children. I mean, most children will never, the first time they ever experience violence is at a public school, from kids who are all trapped there and torn away from their homes, different things like that. So it's just a little bit rich for the same people that support these violent institutions to be crying about residential schools. They're the ones that would have wholeheartedly supported residential schools back in the day, and they're supporting the equivalent, maybe not as bad, but in this, on the spectrum, let's say, of evil today. So
Well, that's it. And because of that patronizing top-down government statement of for your own good. I mean, that's what the whole residential school system was. I'm sure some people were protesting it at the time, but we're saying it's for their own good. And I
Yes.
mean, how dehumanizing. That's to say they don't know what's good for them. We've got to do that. But that's what we're seeing with these health restrictions now. And we're going to see with climate restrictions. We're going to see, potentially with any number of things. Now, you've tried and you've done a very good job. Like the Libertarian Party is kind of unique. I mean, it's been around since '72. It's well established. It's never really, I guess, tried to be a contender for the mainstream in politics. It's represented a distinctive point of view just so that voice can get out there. And that role remains important. But I mean, how can we get more liberty-minded policy, more liberty-minded people on any level of government? I mean, that's the thing, is campaigning on pure liberty. I know from the last federal election, though my campaign was very limited, it's difficult. I mean, you've got to spend a lot of time at every doorstep to try and explain what's going on.
Well, look, it absolutely is a grind, and and unfortunately, it's the only thing I believe that will get us freedom. You can take two tacks with politics. There are two strategies. One is you try to collect votes and get elected, and try to pull some legislative levers and make change and give people freedom. I think that's a naive tactic. I think that's never worked. I think this explains why conservatives have essentially become progressives driving the speed limit. If you want to know what conservative policy is, just look at what liberal policy was 5 or 10 years ago, and that's what conservative policy is today. And look, if you are chasing votes, that's exactly what you have to do. You have to do what Aaron O'Toole is doing, which is fit right neatly in the middle, or as close to the middle as you can, of the Overton window, right? And as over time, the Overton window is shifting further left and further left, and so if you want to win votes, you have to fit directly in that middle of that Overton window. Now, so therein lies the problem: is who's controlling the Overton window? What narrative is shifting it towards the left? Well, it's all the radicals on the left. It is your academic institutions. It's your the SJWs and the even the like the socialists in the NDP and the Green Party, and these are unapologetically people that are just standing for what they believe in, even though I think it's an evil belief system. But they're not interested in getting votes. They're interested in shifting culture. And so I see that role as being left unattended in the Liberty Forum, right? I mean, conservatives are mostly focused on getting votes. I mean, even the PPC, there's a lot of overlapping policies between us, the Libertarian Party, and the PPC. But the big difference is they're focused on getting votes, right? And we see this over and over again with these conservative parties that pop up because of course the conservative base, who generally like freedom, who are generally kind of rural and don't see much need for government and are common sense folk, they don't like the left. And so they line up with conservatives. But the problem is, over time, the conservative parties that are trying to win elections, they leave their base behind because they have to kind of pander to the leftist narrative. And this is why, Aaron O'Toole has a climate policy, and, they have various social activist policies in their thing. And, they won't get too extreme in terms of giving us freedom. They're not really pushing for less gun control. They're just maybe marginally, just a tiny bit. And so, people get disenfranchised with them. And then you have these splinter conservative parties pop up, like, in the 90s, it was the Reform Party. And what we see happen, in Alberta, it was the Wild Rose Party. We love those parties, just like we love the PPC. But, the problem is that as long as you're focused on winning elections and getting votes, these splinter conservative parties that are a little bit more principled are bound to slide right back into the middle of the Overton window. As they gain popularity, they merge with the progressive conservatives or whatever. They form a new party. That party eventually slides right down back into the center of the Overton window, because that's where you have to be if you want to win votes. And so what I suspect will happen with a lot of these parties, like the PPC, is as they gain popularity, if they gain popularity, they're going to be faced with a decision. Okay, we're now in a position where we've got a number of seats in Parliament. Do we want to actually form government? Do we actually want to form a majority government? How are we going to do that? We're going to have to soften our policies and our platforms. We're going to have to maybe consider merging with what's left of the CCP. And, the history continues repeating itself. And eventually we end up with the Overton window continuing to slide to the left. Now, what I think is the answer to that, and what I have a hard time convincing people is, this is what the Libertarian Party to me is all about, is we've had the same policies and platforms since 1972. We've been against lockdowns and restrictions in a public health crisis since 1972. Our policies don't change. We are focused on shifting culture, on being the radicals for liberty that is missing in the cultural milieu or narrative. And our success to us is when the other parties are eventually forced to adopt our policy ideas, our platform ideas, because culture just demands it. So that's a win for me. It's not, and so with that strategy, no, we will never form government. We may never even get a seat in parliament, but that's not the win for us. A win for us is a free society, and shifting culture is what's required. And saying unpopular things and challenging culture doesn't get you a lot of votes. And that is, it's frustrating for people who hear these ideas of liberty and individual responsibility, and they're attracted to it, and they're like, man, I've never heard this philosophy before. Makes so much sense. And I'm just going to have to, as soon as I get out there and campaign, and people will recognize the truth of it and they'll vote for me. And of course, they are deathly dejected when that doesn't happen. They're like, I put in all this work and I got 1 or 2% of the vote. Well, no, so to me, the metric of success and the only game that matters is, are we making more libertarians? Because that's the political spectrum. It's authoritarian versus libertarian. You can have leftist authoritarianism, or leftist flavored authoritarianism, or right-wing flavored authoritarianism, but it's all authoritarianism. So the real test is, are you libertarian or authoritarian? Where are you at on that spectrum? And unless we make more libertarians, we're never going to see the kind of government you and I, or probably the listeners to the show, want to see. It's the culture. Government is downstream from culture. And so until culture shifts, we're not going to see that. And so I think, the work that the Libertarian Party does is and continues to be the most important. We're literally the only ones playing the real game against a huge horde of leftists who are also playing the real game, and no one on the right or in liberty circles seems to understand that. We're too focused on getting votes and forming government and getting seats. So, I think that is the importance of the Libertarian Party, and why I'll continue to support it.
Yeah, no, I'm glad we mentioned a bit of that. Like, some people have talked to me. I've run for a number of alternative parties over the years, and it's empowering in some senses when you run. And barring some bizarre scandal or miracle, you're not going to win the seat. So your point then is to stay on messaging and hopefully get that word out there that wouldn't have gotten out there otherwise. Like when I ran for the Libertarian Party in 2015, I think it was, I knew I wasn't going to unseat John Barlow in Southern Alberta. It just wasn't going to happen. But what I did do was I was the only candidate at the forums to put his feet to the fire on supply management. And if I hadn't have been there, nobody would have spoken to that policy. Nobody would have been able to have that crowd say, holy crap, I never realized just how stupid that damn policy is. And in a small way, hopefully I had a little bit of influence there and chipping away at that. And with a number of candidates across the country doing the same thing, you can bring things to the fore, and the party is a mechanism in order to do it. And it does influence the decision makers, even if it doesn't feel like in a large way. I mean, you'll have zero influence if you don't get out there.
Yeah, absolutely. And, look, the metric of success is, are there more libertarians in Canada today than there were when we started our activism in the party? And I think the resounding answer is yes. And even the PPC and a lot of the success they're having, I think, is a result of us clearing the way and making more libertarians. A lot of their policies are essentially lifted directly from us and had our people in there helping them. So that is a win for us. That's moving things in the right direction. And, I had the same experience. I ran in 2015 in Calgary, Signal Hill, and I went there because Ron Leipert was the incumbent conservative, and he's a red Tory, and he was in charge of the health. He was a health minister when Alberta provincialized emergency medical services. Now, I'm a firefighter by trade, and this was deeply hurt my profession, that this conservative socialized ambulance services, and it had the expected effects. I mean, we're in a code red all the time, which means no ambulance is available to respond all the time, because it's a provincially run bureaucratic resource. And this is what happens in socialism. You have limited resources and no mechanism to expand the resources. And so I ran against Leipert because I wanted to hold his feet to the fire, and I got to do that. And I had a horde, like an army of conservatives in that riding who loved my message. These were social conservatives who I just had to have a 5-minute talk with them, because, when you Google my name, the first thing that comes up is that famous meme, I want gay married couples to protect their marijuana plants with guns. Now, that's a little bit off-putting to a social conservative when they first see it. But once they have a 5-minute conversation with me, they agree with me that, look, morality ought to emerge from what Edmund Burke called the little platoons in society, right? The church, the family, small business, charity. That's where those are the people, those are the units of society that morality ought to emerge from. And when you hand over the keys of morality to the state, and you say, you get them trying to control speech and and be in charge of the institution of marriage and things like that, while you end up getting handing the weapons, those weapons to your ideological enemy. And so now when the left gets in there, they say, okay, you want your church to have tax-free status, you are now going to have to marry the people we tell you have to marry. And so how's that worked out for you? And social conservatives get that after 5 minutes. These people went door to door for me. They raised funds for me. They put up signs for me. They loved me and hated Ron Leipert. And every one of them, very honest people with integrity. And as such, they called me at the last minute on the eve of the election and said, Tim, we're really sorry to do this, but we're worried Trudeau's going to get in. And so we have to hold our nose and vote for Leipert. Sorry, I know we supported you and all that, I have to admire them for their honesty, but that is the reality we face, right? People are always going to vote against their worst fear rather in favor of their highest value. And this is why, focusing on getting votes isn't going to help, because we have to support statism to get these votes, and so it can be discouraging at times, but that is the reality. And so is the metric of success is, here's a bunch of people that heard a message, who heard a libertarian message. They might not have been converted to libertarianism, but they certainly softened their thinking towards it and realized that, okay, there's a lot to this philosophy that even a social conservative, can get behind. Because people ought to be free to choose their path in life. And as long as they own the consequences, you can choose heaven or hell, in your own life. And that's essentially what, most social conservatives believe, and most Christians believe that, look, God gives us free will and we can choose the good path or the bad path. But what we can't have is government deciding for us what the good path is and imposing that on us, because that takes away our free will. That takes away our ability and our moral responsibility to choose right from wrong.
Yeah, well, and the social conservatives, they can embrace it when it's modeled right. One of the best libertarians I know still is Paul Hinman, who I speak to. And personally, he's very socially conservative. He's a devout Mormon, but he's a strong follower. He's based his philosophy on Bastiat. And as long as you leave me alone, I can leave you alone. We can get along here. But so many people are difficult. It takes us a lot of work to get there. I'm kind of coming all the way back to where we started, though, and Shirley pointed out, too, with the mainstream media, which is, she quotes as a propaganda arm of the left. Communication, though, that's for any authoritarian, one of the things you have to do, you want to do is control communication. And it's getting increasingly difficult for them. With these modern mechanisms, with social media platforms, things like that. Now we're seeing pressure on the social media heavyweights like Facebook. And yes, I got the messages too. Apparently I've been exposed to extremists. Right. This battle is big, though. I look at the last things coming out of the Liberal government were 2 bills. They're looking to control communication and speech, C10 and C36. We've got to push back, but how do we do so with that? How do we keep these communication lines open? Because the liberty message can be embraced by people, but we got to be able to get it to them.
Yeah, well, and I think the reality is we're going to see more and more government intermingling, an unholy alliance, let's say, of government and big tech. big tech benefits from the alliance because government essentially creates a moat around it from competition through, really crazy intellectual property regimes that basically prohibit people from competing with them, to regulating, to owning the broadband infrastructure and determining who's allowed to use that infrastructure or not. To, you can go down a list of ways that government puts a moat around these businesses that are really friendly to the establishment, right? And so as a business, yeah, if you are not super friendly to the establishment, you're not being very responsible to your shareholders, right? You have a fiduciary responsibility to your shareholders to maximize profit. And when lobbying government returns 200x on every dollar spent, of course you go lobby government. And so the game is rigged. So you almost can't blame the people that are just playing the game really well, whether it's, corporate CEOs or the politicians who are trying to maintain their place in government. They're incentivized to do the thing. And so ultimately it comes down to us. And the whole cultural narrative that supports this unholy alliance of government and tech is the idea that government ought to be in charge of everything, right? Including our thoughts. There's a huge swath of the Canadian population that thinks that saying bad things and even thinking bad things, whether it's things about climate change or trans activists or you name it, that thinking bad things or having the wrong thoughts here is dangerous. In the same way a conservative might think that, an illiberal Islamist migrating to Canada is dangerous because of the thoughts they hold in their head and what that might mean. While the left is even that times 1,000, right? And so of course, if you have that belief in earnest that these thoughts are dangerous and ought to be stifled and controlled, and well, then you are going to cheerlead this stuff. You're going to see what's wrong with getting rid of hate. What's wrong with clamping down on bigotry and different things like that. And that's the ultimate thing that supports it. And so again, it comes back to this culture of what does my neighbor believe? What does he support? What is he voting for? And what is the narrative that he's promoting? And it's almost always the very narrative that the government is promoting. And so, that's where the challenge comes in. We have to challenge that, because that is the root of the problem. It's not necessarily the politician. It's not Trudeau. You can replace Trudeau with O'Toole or even me or Maxime Bernier, and you're likely going to see very similar policies emerge because your hands are tied when you're in government. If you want to stay in that position, you are going to have to play by the rules that culture imposes, and that the institutions that emerge out of that culture and the bureaucracies that emerge out of that culture impose on you as a politician. So in a lot of ways, you're chained down to that agenda, even if you don't believe in it or support it. And so, ultimately, to me, the root of the problem is we the people. I mean, Trudeau is just a vacuous frat boy at the end of the day, living his best life. He's got no deep thoughts or philosophies. He's playing a role that he thinks people want him to play, and that will get him that position. He's doing it masterfully. But that's it. He's an empty, vacuous puppet. He's not in control any more than anyone else. At the end of the day, he's a simple, perfect reflection of culture. And like Mencken said, eventually democracy will be perfected and perfectly reflect the population, and we'll have a complete idiot at the head of, in charge. And that's what we're seeing with is basically the perfection of democracy at this point.
Yeah, that is just depressing to look at the TV and see Trudeau speak and those glazed eyes and think that's a reflection of us. So, wow, we should really rethink where we're going and where we've ended up. So the Libertarian Party, to move further, so you're stepping back. When is the leadership process going to be triggered, and how's that going to be going ahead?
Right. Well, our leader gets elected at convention. And so we have a convention coming up in Edmonton on August 14th and 15th. I think a couple of leadership candidates have already emerged. And so I'm excited. I think, I've heard that about 4 or 5 different people are interested in it, which is fantastic. I think every time I've ran for leader, there's been maybe one other guy. I think last time I ran unopposed, people just like me, I guess, and they people probably think they can't win if I'm in the race. And I've always said, well, I want people to challenge me. I want there to be a robust kind of, debate, and because that kind of holds me accountable. One can kind of get lazy and lackadaisical when you don't have people nipping at your feet. So I think it's great that there's a bunch of people running for that position right now. It speaks to the importance that they feel in terms of the Libertarian Party, and it gives our members a good choice in terms of who they want representing them as the front man. So I look forward to that August 14th and 15th.
Great. Yeah. And I mean, time's creeping up fast. I mean, it's looking very likely we're coming into a federal election campaign pretty quickly. Has the party been preparing some candidates to get out there and get the message on the streets and kind of get ready for this fall?
Yeah, absolutely. We've got candidates all across the country, who have stepped up and said they're interested in running. And, it's definitely harder now to break through the noise now that we have, a couple of parties that have overlapping views on liberty, let's say like the Maverick Party and the PPC. So we have, it's hard to recruit. It's harder to recruit now. But I think there's still a lot of people that are attracted to our pure message of, look, we can't just have liberty in one area. We have to have liberty in all areas. This isn't, and to undermine liberty in one area is to open the door to a slippery slope of statism and the infringement of liberty everywhere. You don't allow a little bit of cancer. You got to cut that tumor right out completely. And I think people are recognizing that, and they're more and more, they're attracted to the message of the Libertarian Party. So that's good. But at the same time, I do worry, as a firefighter paramedic, having gone through this pandemic in the last year, and seeing COVID patients, but also seeing more than that, seeing the what I call emergencies of isolation, suicide attempts and drug overdoses and severe depression and just people breaking down and breaking apart. It's been horrendous over the past year, and now that things are opening up, I'm seeing an even different side of what this culture has imposed. Now that people have been told for the last year that they can't be trusted with their own healthcare, that their judgment is lacking, that they need to trust the experts and trust the science. And we are seeing, we're setting records in terms of call volume now that we've never seen. Like, we're just run, the system is bursting at the seams in terms of EMS and emergency, at least, with people just they're getting, well, to give you an example, a 55-year-old guy has a nosebleed for the first time in his life and doesn't know what to do. So he calls 911. An old guy has a fever, doesn't know what to do. So he calls 911. Someone else has a bit of belly pain. Someone else, felt a little faint on the golf course in 35-degree weather and called, all these things that you or I would never call 911 for or go to Emerge for, because we could just deal with them ourselves at home. Suddenly it's like a flood of people who don't trust themselves to look after their own healthcare, are just flooding the system. And, I almost can't blame them, because they've been told for the past year that they're idiots and they're dumb and they can't manage their own risks at all. Trust the experts. And that is a troubling trend. That's almost more troubling to me than all the isolation and depression I've seen over the past year, is just this culture of complete and utter dependence on the state. And man, I don't know how to combat that or what to do about it. And it's kind of left me shaken a little bit and foggy in terms of what's the best path forward for me to, try to advance liberty. So I'm going to hand it over to someone who has a clear vision and is, going to drive things forward.
Yeah, well, we've turned the state into our motherhood, a figure almost, to put her hand on her head when we feel a little fever. It's now you're calling 911. That is distressing. Something, since you are a paramedic and you're seeing a lot more. One thing I do is drive Uber quite often in my spare time. I enjoy it. It gets me out. I talk to people. I see things. I don't just drive. I observe. And one of the things I'd seen a lot of, and more so, particularly in this year, is ambulances constantly and chronically. And often I see it's an overdose case. I've actually started carrying a naloxone kit in my car in case I encounter an event and possibly might be able to lend a hand. But I mean, there's no doubt that some degree of the addiction epidemic that's really spiked in this year has had at least a contributing factor from the state crackdown on personal liberties, like people being shut down and they've led to self-medicating. Where do we go with that?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the roots of addiction are just that. They're isolation. And I think it's Johann Hari who talks about addiction as a disease of connection, essentially, right? And the cure to that is connection with community and people and family and friends. People who are loved and supported in their community generally don't use. I still remember my great grandfather's memoirs, and there's a line in there. He escaped Stalinist Russia, and in his memoirs he talks about the rise of communism and how with the rise of communism there was an increasing lineup at the liquor store. As people, as he put it, sought to anesthetize themselves from the pain of their existence, essentially. And I think that's what we're seeing now. Certainly, it's just been an unprecedented. One of my colleagues was responding to an overdose, administering naloxone, and meanwhile there was a lady there who had a syringe of heroin that she was about to inject in her, and he's like, "What are you doing? Why are you injecting that? You're going to overdose." And she's like, "I never overdose." And she injected it, and 2 minutes later they were giving her naloxone because she was unconscious and not breathing. And it's just a wave of desperation, loneliness. And so I mean, the cure for this, of course, is connection and personal responsibility. You cannot, our approach to drugs has been to lock up and isolate these addicts, right, who get into dealing and using to support their habit, and they're self-medicating the pain of their existence and loneliness. What do? We isolate them and make them even more lonely and think that that's going to solve the problem. But now that we have that on steroids, I mean, all the people that talk about collective and society and community seem to be the one promoting all these policies that have us all atomized and isolated in our own homes, and using these electronic kind of virtual or fake means of connecting, holding society together. And we need face-to-face contact. We need human touch. We need to feel that love from each other and that support from each other. And the bigger government gets, the less we have of that, because I've said this for years, we've outsourced our sense of personal responsibility to the government. So when my neighbor falls on hard times and loses his jobs or becomes disabled or something like that, I don't feel any sense of duty or obligation or responsibility to my neighbor, because I know there's someone else that's looking after that. There's someone else that's responsible for that. I see this in emergency services all the time. People will, I remember getting called for a house fire once, and I asked dispatch. I was the first arriving officer, so that I was going to be taking incident command, and I wanted to have some information. Are there people in the house? How bad is the fire? What's going on? And dispatch said, well, we don't know if there's anybody in the house or how involved it is. The person was just driving by and saw the fire and reported it. I'm like, who doesn't feel a sense of duty or obligation to at least knock on the door? We don't expect you to run into a burning building and pull people out, be a hero, but at least try to help a little bit. I mean, wouldn't that be what a normal human would do? And of course we get there, and like 3 fire halls screaming through traffic, probably causing multiple fender benders to get to this burning house and save some people, arrived to find that it was the reflection of the sunset in the picture window, because someone didn't have the common sense or sense of personal responsibility. And then later on that day, remember, the whole city of Fort McMurray was shut down because of this Amber Alert issue, because a child was being kidnapped, abducted at a playground in broad daylight at about 6 p.m. And when all things shook out, it turned out it was the kid's uncle who was taking her home for supper. She didn't want to go. She wanted to stay playing. So she was kind of kicking and screaming. Now, if you or I were to see what we thought was a kidnapping in progress, wouldn't we at least confront the guy, try to get some details, like try to break it up, even if you're not physically capable of interjecting, at least you can confront that situation and, watch, and follow or something like that. But no one did that. They just saw what they thought was a kidnapping and said, oh, I'll just call 911 and they'll take care of it. And so this failure of us to take personal responsibility has and outsource that personal responsibility to the state so that we feel good. We supported minimum wage, so we didn't have to go out and start a business and pay people what we thought was a living wage and take that responsibility on ourselves. We can feel good about the fact that the government is doing it for us. Well, that's I think the real problem here. People aren't willing to take personal responsibility, and they get the payoff of feeling good that they promoted some kind of policy by making some Facebook posts and voting the right way or something like that. That is, I think that is the real tragedy here, is that, and so I think part of me thinks that the revolution just needs to be, we need to start doing things. We need to start taking personal responsibility and finding solutions in our own community and building infrastructure there that is built on these voluntary arrangements of people not being coerced, but doing it out of the love and goodness of their heart and out of their sense of duty to their neighbors and their communities. Just because eventually this state is, this apparatus is going to collapse under its own weight, and we need something in place when that happens. So more and more I'm kind of being pulled towards this idea of building solutions locally and wherever I can to allow people to take more responsibility in their own lives, despite all the things that the government is doing. And, there's a friend of mine, Gabriel Scheer, is just back from Chile, and he's looking at building a community in Saskatchewan that is libertarian, and, that is going to be an incorporated municipality and is going to be, built along these guidelines of not using coercion and violence to get things done, but rather voluntary means and relationships, where it's like society, as Edmund Burke describes it, built on the little platoons of family, of charity, of church, of business building up. So that's maybe where I think I'm going to be focused a little bit more on, is trying to build up solutions rather than just sit here and attack government and talk about all the ways it's bullshit. I think that's still important, but more and more I'm thinking of actually building something where we are taking personal responsibility rather than relying government on it.
Well, I like how you brought up, community and some of that, and knowing your neighbors. The rural-urban divide, I mean, that's a whole thing for another show almost, but I live in Pritis, and just an example that came to mind was when I ran the pub, I had a group of 4 jokers come in, very, I think they were wired, and they were being a real pain. They brought in outside liquor. I had to eject them. They said, well, no, we're going to stay and we'll beat the hell out of you if you get in our face. But then the bar rose up and the locals all ejected them on my behalf. So it wasn't a matter of calling the police, because police have 40-minute response times there anyways. But it worked out fantastically. It was, tense but peaceful. And you know what? Those guys live in the area, but they never showed up at the bar ever again. It was effective and preventative. It's that sense of community. In a city bar, everybody would have stayed seated and waited for the police to arrive.
Right.
And it's the same with fires in our area. If somebody sees smoke coming up, the neighbors get up. I mean, they'll call 911, but then they drive over. They'll say, what can I do? And I got a bucket and a broom full of water or whatever. And in the city, same sort of thing. Somebody will call 911 and carry on with their day. If we could transfer that attitude to urban communities, I think we'd all be better for it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And you're right. There is a rural urban divide. And I think it is because, folks that live in rural areas don't rely a lot on the government. They are taking personal responsibility. And I mean, it's probably a large part of it is a choice as well. That's the lifestyle that attracted them. The lifestyle where you are being, your survival is dependent on your ability to competently manage responsibility, to take it on and deal with it, and do so in collaboration with those around you, your neighbors, your community, and that sort of thing. It really builds up social bonds. And I once had this very progressive guy who was just fascinated with with my politics ask me, I hear what you're saying about the individual, Tim, but what about community? Where does community come into this libertarian philosophy? Because I'm really, community is important to me. And I said, well, Ken, I mean, the first thing you have to do if you want to build up a community with all these social bonds is put the gun down. You can't have a government continually coercively pointing guns at people and imposing all these arbitrary rules on people and expect to have a bonded community and culture. You have to respect individuals. Good fences make good neighbors, and I think that's true. But the left doesn't see that, and they don't, because quite often they live in these big cities where government looks after everything. They don't have to figure out how to dispose of their garbage. They don't have to figure out how to repair the potholes on their half a mile long driveway. They don't have to figure out how to grow their food or harvest it or anything. They just, as soon as they're hungry, they can skip the dishes. Everything is provided for them to the point where they don't have to take. So, I don't know how you solve that, how you get people that live in urban areas who are completely dependent on government to have the same attitude of those in rural areas that really have no use for it. But that is the challenge we face.
Well, and it's a big picture discussion. I appreciate hearing your optimism, though, when you're looking. You're not just stepping away from the Libertarian Party and giving up on the pursuit of spreading the message of liberty, I guess you could say. I mean, you're going to stay active, and you feel that there's been inroads made, and I agree with you. I feel there definitely has, and is as futile as it feels sometimes, like pushing and the trends don't go your way. The bigger frustration is to not do anything, because they're definitely not going to go your way.
The essay I read, because it gets discouraging at times, trying to spread this message. But there's an essay by Albert J. Nock that I go back to. I think he wrote it in the 30s, and it's called Isaiah's Job. Now, I'm not a religious person, but this essay spoke to me, and it's a story about Isaiah, God's prophet, who said, God, you sent me out here to warn people about the coming apocalypse or catastrophe if they can carry on in their sinful ways. And I'm out here pounding the pavement and working hard to spread this message, and no one is heeding it. No one's listening to me. People keep sinning. Things seem to be heading towards hell. Like, why did you order me to do this when it's not doing anything, when it's not going to avert catastrophe? And God told him, he said, look, your job was never to avert catastrophe. It was there is a group of people out there. There are individuals out there that are hearing your message, that believe the same thing you believe, that those are the people that after the cataclysm comes are going to band together and rebuild society. And those are the people that you are ministering to, that you are encouraging, that you are giving hope to. And those are the remnant. And Ron Paul often talked about the remnant in his campaign. That's where he got that message from. And so even if we're not going to turn this ship around, even if there's no hope left for Canada or Western civilization, and things collapse under their own weight, there will be something new afterwards. And there are people out there right now. And so one of the most gratifying things I found over the past 7 years has been just traveling Canada and connecting with these people, the remnant, the people that thought that they were all alone out there in this world, that there was no one that thought like them, that everyone was, that the whole world was against them, and that they were their own little island there. And everywhere I've gone and spoken, and these people come out of the woodwork drawn to this message at a pub or a church or wherever the meeting is. And what's left behind is a network of people who have each other's backs, who, when shit goes south, they're going to be each other's support. And so that is one of the positive unintended consequences of getting out there and being active and preaching this message and being called, feeling like you're called to, but yet not seeing any tangible results that you expected to see. There's this positive unintended thing that happens where all these networks and communities kind of emerge everywhere I've gone. So that's been very gratifying for me. And I think, that's kind of what that essay, I go back to it regularly when I feel kind of hopeless or a little bit depressed about how things are going.
Well, I appreciate that. And like I said, and I do appreciate that messaging. I'm looking forward to seeing what you get up to in coming years. As I said, it's not like you're retiring from life. You're just stepping back from the leadership of the Libertarian Party. And I'm looking forward to see what the new leadership brings about with it, and hopefully some great messaging in this coming election. So thanks for coming on with me. It's always great chatting with you. I really enjoy it. And I see the commenters have as well. So I'm certain we'll be talking again sometime soon.
You bet. Thanks, Cory. Appreciate you having me on.
All right, Tim. No, it was really great. I will talk to you later. Yeah, it is so easy to talk to Tim, and I could go on and on and on. Okay, Carmen is asking where to sign up for the party. I'm not sure. I know if you look Libertarian Party of Canada up, though, you can definitely find information for signing up and getting on board. And as Tim said, their convention's in Edmonton this year. So, Albertans can get in there. And I did really like his messaging, like I said, because that's that thing I said as somebody who's run for, you'd want to call smaller or fringe parties or things like that. It's not pointless. It's not beating your head against the wall. It might not feel like it, but you are doing something good. You're helping things. You're moving the needle, even if you don't see it. And you're building that community. And maybe that community won't be able to make much change right now, but a little later it might. And you got to start somewhere. You might as well start now rather than before rather than after the crash comes. Or as D says, and this is an interesting thing that came out of Tim's conversation. How does the left grow to such proportions when it seems like they're becoming a majority? And am I wrong? No, you're not wrong. And that was a lot of kind of where Tim was going with things. We've gotten to this state of personal irresponsibility. We really feel that the government is responsible for everything, and we embrace it. And we want them to. It's a form of laziness. We just don't want to have to take on these things for ourselves, and we give it away to the government. And it's grown, and that attitude has grown, and the left panders to that. So they continue to grow support. Conservatives give the message out that you got to take care of yourself. Well, that unfortunately causes them a couple points in the polls, and then they back off on it. And as Tim said, they tend to be just 2 weeks behind the Liberals or whatever, not too far after. They will follow suit. So this is difficult. How do we build those communities? How do you get people to start thinking I should be taking care of my neighbors rather than, and they take care of me, a community, rather than waiting for big government to do it? It's a monumental, a massive endeavor. And he's been working on it for some time. He phrases it fantastically. It's sad that he's leaving the leadership of the party because he's done a really good job. As he said, he's not done. He's not going anywhere. And hopefully he can keep going with things. Yeah, Patricia, the audio was breaking up. It's bad internet and a few things. It's part of the summer break. As I said earlier, we're going to be moving away from this live model. Live's nice where we can get these interactions and questions and everything, but we just don't have that technical basis yet. The standard is just a year and a half old in its reincarnation, I guess you could say. We're building our infrastructure. We're getting better. And the shows are going to be improving with some, better audio, better video and everything. I mean, we've got some great guests and some great discourse, but we've got to iron some of those things out. So summer's a good time to do that. And that's part of why we're still going to be putting out stuff, but it's going to be recorded rather than live from this show and from Nathan Gita. The pipeline will be live every Wednesday still. So I'll close out, getting back to government and authority and frustration. Canada Day was yesterday. I've talked to others about, if you say, you're a supporter of independence, why do you even care about Canada Day? Well, you see, again, I'm not one of those who has this rage at history. At Canada Day, assuming the West becomes independent, 10 years from now, 5 years from now, 30 years from now, whatever it might be, a portion of Alberta's history will have been as part of Canada. And I don't mind, and I won't mind recognizing that. I mean, I see Canada as a country that's under a broken system, a system that's not serving us all correctly, a system that we can't repair, that we have to tear down and rebuild. But I'm not going to take up my vitriol on the country itself. Just because the country made mistakes doesn't mean I scorn the entire nation. This Cancel Canada Day movement is a bunch of crap. Let's put it bluntly, it's a bunch of crap, okay? I mean, this country has done some horrific things wrong. But if you look at the world scale of it, and I know every country says that on their Independence Day, Canada Day, those sorts of things, but it's true. It's one of the best countries on earth. It's got some of the most freedoms on earth. I mean, they're under threat, and we've always got to stand up for them. But to try and cancel the one day of the year that we just observe and celebrate what the nation has done right, and to listen to ass-kissing, virtue-signaling pricks like Ned and Nancy say we should hang our heads in shame during Canada Day and put these orange things up because of the residential school system. No. I will still mourn the horrific things that were done by the government and the residential school system. But I'm not going to be ashamed. I keep seeing that. I was fighting with people on Twitter. So you should be ashamed of yourself. Kiss my ass. No, I didn't put a single kid in a residential school. I am working now, as with Tim, to get to a place where the state never has such power, where they can grab kids from a household and stuff them in a school like that. I can't fix what was done 100 years ago, 50 years ago, even 30 years ago. I can't fix what was done 2 days ago. But I can fix things in the future and try to make them better. And hanging my head in shame that I'm supposed to be considered a bad person because I'm not descended from an Aboriginal person, that's the bottom line of it. No, that's ridiculous. It's divisive. It's identity politics at its ugliest. And again, as I said, with the irony of people like Nenshi, and Nenshi's a statist, he's a guy who loves control. That's part of why he keeps that mask law. He's the kind of guy who likes the kind of big, intrusive government that does things, in like air quotes, for our own good. No, he's not responsible for the residential school system either. Of course not. I won't lay that blame on him. His attitude where I'm the smartest man in the room. That's a literal quote from that peckerhead. And I will tell you what's good for you. I will manage how you're going to live. That's that attitude. That's the attitude that the Laurentian elite had when they modeled and imposed to the residential school system. Now they're just expanding it in a more broad way. And no, they're not going to grab us and stick us in schools. They're infringing all different other freedoms, such as speech, such as property, movement, commerce. But no, I'm not going to look at the one day a year where we observe the history of Canada and celebrate what it's done right and say that I should be ashamed because they found a number of graves outside these residential schools. And, some of the coverage on that as well. We've known about the residential school system, but we've got to get a realistic lens. See, I watched CTV, I was bitching about them the other day. One thing that was interesting was, I believe, the Cranbrook one, where they've been locating a bunch of bodies, was one of the people there on the location was getting quite pissed off, and she was a native lady. She was saying, look, these were not bodies discovered. We always knew they were there. There used to be grave markers. They were wooden. They've deteriorated. They've gone away over time. We've been doing this so we can find and identify people and permanently mark them. And, there's a lot of non-native cemeteries that have been doing the same thing because we're on the prairies. Yeah, you get a death during the 20s and you're out on the range. You buried your loved one and you put a wooden cross, and that's all you could do. And 30 years later, that thing's gone. So they're relocating these things. So, let's get the perspective on here. That's not a mass grave. I mean, that location, it turns out as well, had a hospital right next to it that operated for a number of years. And they used that cemetery as well. And again, I don't want to understate the horrors of the residential system. It was still 100% wrong. These kids should not have been snatched from their family. This motivation to have churches teach and take the Indianness, and that's some of the terms they used for it, out of these kids in a forced institution is disgusting. It's horrific. And we can't forget it, and we should talk about it. But let's get realistic. Let's stop lighting our hair on fire now over all of these new, and I'll call it, quotes again, discoveries. They aren't. We're treating every one of them as if this wasn't known. I mean, somebody else made a fantastic point about it, because somebody was slicing dicing, well, the kids died of disease, and this and that, that's true. But where else does somebody have a cemetery at their school? That's nuts. And that shows the disrespect that the state had for the parents. It shows that, any other children back then, the parents would have been let know that their child had passed on. The remains of the child would have been brought back to the community to be interred whatever way that community does. But in this case, they just buried the children at the school site and moved along. This is terrible. But we're reporting on it in all the wrong ways. And we're looking at it in all the wrong ways. And now this insane trend of attacking Catholics churches and cathedrals. Again, guys, you're cowards. People go out in the night and burn things and vandalize, and you're cowards. You're pussies. Don't try and, you're not heroes. You're just thugs. If you really want to go to the target government. And no, again, I'm not talking about screaming at politicians in the streets. I'm just saying change government, blame government, though. Look at that. It's the state. The church could never have done all of those things with the residential schools without the authority of the state, the permission. In fact, they were contracted by the state. It doesn't mean the church isn't responsible whatsoever. And hey, have a look at some of the stuff on the East Coast and that. There's a lot of Catholic priests who have done a hell of a lot of things and had nothing to do with Native kids. These people who wrap themselves in the cloth and go celibate, they turn themselves into perverts on many levels, and they've done it many times. Not all of them have, but there's some real issues with religion at that point. But either way, we're just getting some really bad reporting. We're getting a lot of rage that's misdirected. It's going the wrong way. We're not moving towards solutions that way. Let's try to be a little more rational with this. We can still be upset. Absolutely, we should be. And we should still look at this unvarnished, terrible chapter of Canadian history and see and make sure we don't repeat it ever again. But we got to stop at listening to the mainstream media reporting this crap every time as if it's a new discovery, and just feeding the rage, feeding the hate, feeding the division, the identity politics, which is the worst thing on earth. And I've said it before and I say it again. I'll close the show with that. Nobody is serious about a solution unless they come up and say they want to see an end to the Indian Act and the reserve system. But that's it. It's race-based policy. It's wrong. It's 100% friggin' wrong. And it's failing. And it's always failed. And if you think you can fix things within this system, you're just full of shit. You're delusional. So until you get up there and say you're getting rid of the Indian Act and the reserve system, you're pissing in the wind. You're not going to fix a thing. Where on earth do you think we could take a group of people based on race, have entirely separate policies that apply to them, literally based on their race? I thought we're supposed to have grown past this. And then keep them living in a separate area from the rest of the world based on race as complete dependents of the government. And you're shocked that it's dysfunctional? You're shocked that they got massive substance abuse, domestic abuse and crises, high suicide levels, earlier, like shorter life expectancies, addictions. Come on. Of course they do. And it doesn't matter which race. If you took anybody and segregated them like that and stuck them off someplace, they're going to be socially dysfunctional. So again, until somebody says, get rid of the Indian Act and get rid of the reserve system, we're not going anywhere, guys. We're going to see more of these things happening. It's going to get worse and worse. All right, I'm going to close it up for today. As I said, this is the end of the live stuff. I know some others are commenting that the sound is bad again. I'm sorry about that. It will be better when we get rolling again, I assure you. And for our sponsors, again, Resistance Coffee Company. These guys, they put out some great stuff. No virtue signaling. It's good tasting coffee. I got it at home. I like the name they gave to their decaf. It's Empty Promises, so it's got all the flavor, but none of the caffeine. And then the other stuff with the caffeine has great flavor as well. And they give 10% of every purchase to organizations that are fighting for the constitutional freedoms of Canadians. Go to resistancecoffee.com to order your coffee, and they deliver it. It's perfect. Comes to your doorstep. Tastes great. Type the promo code Western Standard in there. It'll give you that slot when you buy the coffee. It was very simple when I did it, and I get confused with online forums, but no, there it is, Western Standard, all one word, and you get that instant discount, 10% off that first order, and it's worth it. You know what? You'll be happy to pay full price later on, and no 10% of the rest of it's still going to go towards good causes, standing up for your rights. Speaking of standing up for your rights, the CCFR, that's the Canadian Coalition of Firearms Rights, is our other sponsor, and these guys are actually suing the federal government on your behalf for firearms owners. And you got to get there, become a member, donate to their legal fund, help them out. Go to firearmsrights.ca and click Why Join, and they'll lay out what they're doing, why you should join them, how to help them, and how they're going to help you. So thanks all for tuning in. You all have a good summer. I'm certain we'll be interacting again as things go. And yes, maybe we'll get things live, further down the road when we get a better setup. We've been trying this last few months. We've had some great guests and great content, and we're going to have some great guests and podcasts coming up again soon. So keep watching the Facebook page, watching YouTube. We're still producing content. We're just changing the way we're doing it. And y'all have a good summer.